Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take headlines. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to meet US President Donald Trump in Washington to discuss a Gaza ceasefire and regional issues amid ongoing efforts to broker a deal with Hamas. Kenyan police opened fire on charging protesters in Nairobi as they mark 35 years since pro-democracy government. At least 4,000 refugees have crossed into India's northeastern state of Mizoram over the past 4 days, following clashes between two anti-junta armed groups in neighboring Myanmar, according to officials. 12 Turkish soldiers died from methane gas exposure during a search operation in a cave in northern Iraq. They were looking for the body of a soldier killed. The U.S. state of Texas raced to find dozens missing, swept away by flash floods that have killed over 80, as forecasters warn of more torrential rains. We start with the updates from the ongoing BRICS Summit in Brazil's Rio de Janeiro. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is attending the summit. He met Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the sidelines and endorsed his call for reforming the United Nations Security Council. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi posted on X about his meeting with President Ramaphosa. The post was captioned, "Good catching up with my friend." Now, interacted during the G7 summit in Canada, where both leaders were invited. After that meeting, Prime Minister Modi said that he and President Ramaphosa and the Brazilian President Lula da Silva would be unwavering in their commitment to the global South. The ongoing BRICS Summit now offers a platform to advance that commitment. During his address, Prime Minister Modi made a clarion call for multipolar, inclusive world order through meaningful institutional reforms. He reiterated that global organizations challenges. He emphasized the urgent need to reform multilateral institutions. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa backed this call. He urged for a reformed United Nations Security Council, saying the body has become too rigid, too narrow, and too disconnected from today's multipolar realities.
As many conflicts around the world persist, as new threats emerge and old institutions falter, the pursuit of global peace and security has never been more urgent or more complex than it is now. Yet it has often failed to meet the challenges of today. In responding to these challenges, ranging from humanitarian crises that are unfolding in many parts of the world to open acts of aggression, the Security Council has become too rigid, too narrow, and too disconnected from today's multipolar realities.
In the joint declaration, BRICS members reiterated their support for India and Brazil's aspirations for a greater role at the United Nations, including the Security Council. The declaration also condemned terrorism in all forms, highlighted cooperation in technology and digital infrastructure, and reaffirmed support for BRICS, the new development bank, and its expansion. The summit hosted by Brazil marks the first gathering since the bloc's expansion. Current members of BRICS include Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Egypt, UAE, Iran, Ethiopia, and Indonesia. Newly announced BRICS partner countries include Belarus, Bolivia, Kazakhstan, Cuba, Nigeria, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Uganda, and Uzbekistan. The BRICS bloc now accounts for half the world's population and 40% of global economic output. Prime Minister Modi has consistently highlighted the significance of BRICS in today's world and the need for unity among global South countries. India's partnership with South Africa is a key component of that vision. As one of Africa's leading voices, South Africa joins in representing the global South on the world stage. And for more on this, we have with us Patrick Bond, a political economist, joining us live from Johannesburg. Thank you for being with us, Patrick.
It's great to be back with you, Alison.
Now, Patrick, what were the key strategic or economic outcomes from the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Ramaphosa, and how do they align with the broader BRICS agenda?
Well, this BRICS has been overshadowed by the elephant in the room who could not be named, Donald Trump, and both Modi nearly signed a trade deal with Trump, and then Cyril Ramaphosa had a great deal of trouble just a couple of months ago, having to go to the White House and watch some films of alleged, white genocide, all of those ridiculous rumors from Trump. And so there's a certain tension at the surface, but both need, they think, the relationship with the U.S. to continue at the level of trade. And I think the fact that the United Nations Security Council, as you mentioned, is going to be one of the hot potatoes in the BRICS. Already, Egypt and Ethiopia have formally opposed South Africa being part of the UN Security Council's second-tier permanent membership. So when you saw, as you pointed out, Ramaphosa endorsing the India and Brazil component, it's very striking because here in Johannesburg, just 2 years ago at the BRICS Summit, South Africa was included amongst those. And that really reflects that they've expanded. They've doubled in size, as you've said, and it's maybe a little bit of indigestion because last September in New York, in April in Rio, and now it looks like the Egyptian and Ethiopian members of the BRICS aren't as gracious towards Ramaphosa, representing South Africa, putting Pretoria into the UN Security Council, as South Africa is to India. It's quite an interesting contradiction of diplomacy gone awry.
Right, and how do India and South Africa currently view each other's role in global South cooperation? And did the meeting indicate any shift or deepening in that partnership?
Well, there are several areas that are so crucial, like pharmaceuticals, and especially, Alison, the debate at the World Trade Organization between 2020 and 2022, where India and South Africa were together demanding intellectual property waivers on the vaccines for COVID-19, and they failed to get them. The WTO really closed up. So both, obviously, India with its huge pharmaceutical industry and the generic side, South Africa, strong capacity, they have mutual interests there. But I think the major question is whether companies from these two big powers, India, the biggest economy in South Asia, and of course the biggest population in the world, and South Africa having a very powerful role in Africa. We've hosted here in South Africa not only the 1860 Indian migrants, who now number in the city of Durban nearly 850,000, one of the biggest concentrations of India for culture, but we've also had new Indian companies after the end of apartheid, like Tata and Mahindra on automobile. We've seen Indian-owned Mittal, ArcelorMittal, and we've seen also Vedanta, we've seen Coal of India, we've seen some of the bigger industrial and mining, aluminium and steel, ArcelorMittal. These are very, very important companies here, and they're actually in decline, certainly ArcelorMittal, closing many of its foundries. And I think part of that question is whether by appealing at national to national interests to keep some of these strategic interests like iron and steel going, at the face where both India and South Africa are threatened with major tariffs by Trump. And you know, Alison, he renewed that threat last night. Donald Trump said, anyone near the BRICS, anyone doing anti-American politics, you automatically get another 10% tariff. It's going to be on August 1, interesting to see who's coming out ahead. Maybe India will already cut a deal before then. But I would suggest that both of them should be working more closely together and in opposition to Trump.
Yes. And Patrick, both Prime Minister Modi and President Ramaphosa have reiterated the need for, as you mentioned, their UN reforms and a more inclusive multipolar world order during their BRICS engagement. How significant is this shared diplomatic stance in shaping the future direction of BRICS, especially in terms of the institutional reforms and global governance?
Well, there's a lot rhetorically at stake, and the fact that India hosted the G20 in September 2023 in Delhi, and we're hosting it in Johannesburg in November, and then it goes to Donald Trump, where you don't know what will happen to global governance at that stage. He's dropped out of the UNFCCC, the World Health Organization, UNESCO, and all the made a big mess of global trade. The second is the BRICS. South Africa hosted here 2 years ago, and India next year. So these are important symbolically. But we would look at maybe something more concrete. A real test would be, where do these two countries stand on changing international finance for fairness and rationality and less volatility, less quantitative easing and ups and downs of interest rates? And the de-dollarization agenda has been thorny for both countries, not because Modi or Ramaphosa aren't dissatisfied with the way the U.S. Fed has so much power, but it's their financial districts that have a lot of clout, certainly here in Johannesburg. And I think, therefore, unfortunately, Brazil as well, but certainly South Africa and India are seen as the three of the BRICS that are more westward gazing, along with Egypt and UAE, of course, but therefore slowing down some of the reforms we need. Maybe a new generation of leaders in a future year will change that. But right now, they seem to be locked in to the imperial West rather than truly fighting it.
Patrick, it's always great to have you on the show. Thank you for your valued insights there.
Thank you.
And our next story is from South Sudan, which has received migrants deported by the United States. A group of 8 migrants has arrived in South Sudan from the US, but only one of them is South Sudanese. The rest are from Asia and Latin America. The group includes 2 nationals from Myanmar, 2 from Cuba, and 1 each from Vietnam, Laos, and Mexico. They initially left the United States for South Sudan in May, but their flight was diverted to Djibouti, where they were held for weeks at a U.S. military base. This after a federal court imposed a stay on third country deportations. But that stay was lifted last week by the U.S. Supreme Court, clearing the way for deportations. Now, the current location of the men in South Sudan remains unclear. Officials have not confirmed if South Sudanese authorities have detained them or what their fate will be. Earlier, South Sudanese officials had said that they will deport the migrants to their respective nations. Lawyers representing the detainees say their clients face a serious risk of torture if forced to stay in South Sudan. They also argue the migrants were denied constitutional rights through this process. U.S. officials have labeled the migrants as barbaric, violent, criminal, illegal aliens, with convictions including murder, sexual assault, and armed robbery.
We found a nation that was willing to accept custody of these vicious illegal aliens. We are removing these convicted criminals from American soil so they can never hurt another American victim, American man, child, or woman. They can never attack witnesses, families, victims, or anyone else.
The fate of these migrants has become a flashpoint in the ongoing legal battle over the Trump administration's controversial deportation strategy. This includes sending migrants to so-called third countries with which they have no connection. South Sudan has long been considered dangerous due to continued unrest after a 5-year-long civil war. The State Department continues to warn against travel to the nation due to widespread violent crime and armed conflict. Despite security concerns, the country remains on the Trump administration's list of migrant deportation destinations. The U.S. has also sent migrants to El Salvador and to Costa Rica. Rwanda has confirmed it is in talks with the U.S. for a migration deal, while Benin, Angola, Equatorial Guinea, Eswatini, and Moldova have been mentioned in media reports as potential next destinations. This policy of sending migrants to countries with whom they have no ties has drawn widespread legal, humanitarian, and international criticism. But following the Supreme Court ruling, the U.S. is now legally permitted, for now, to deport migrants to third countries. Africa has become a preferred destination for such deportation deals, not just by the United States, but also by some European countries. While leaders of these receiving nations have agreed to host migrants, these countries often struggle with limited healthcare, security, and other key infrastructure. How will this affect African states in the long run? This remains to be seen. And moving on, the global race for influence and relevance in Africa is heating up. More and more countries are vying for military, political, and economic control. The United States, Russia, and China already engaged in a fierce battle for influence in the continent. The Gulf countries are also catching up. Saudi Arabia is now intensifying this race by ramping up efforts to deepen its influence in Africa. In the latest, the kingdom has announced plans to expand its diplomatic and economic footprint across Africa. Riyadh's new Africa package includes $25 billion in new investments and the opening of more than 40 embassies in the coming years. Saudi Arabia's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Walid al-Khareji, made these announcements at the annual Africa Day celebration held in Riyadh. The Saudi investment package includes $10 billion in export financing and $5 billion in additional development funding by 2030. Historically, Saudi Arabia has been providing support to Africa for development and humanitarian efforts. Riyadh has already provided over $45 billion in aid and development projects to 54 African countries. The King Salman Humanitarian Aid and Relief Center has delivered more than $450 million in humanitarian assistance to 46 African nations. Now, experts see Saudi Arabia's renewed focus on Africa as a timely and strategic decision, and there are multiple reasons driving this decision. The first, geopolitical influence. By investing in Africa, Saudi aims to widen its diplomatic relationships outside the Gulf and to increase its global influence. Africa is a strategically important continent with a growing population, so African countries could be a valuable partner for Riyadh. This brings us to the second reason, economic diversification. Under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030, Saudi is pushing to reduce its economic dependence on oil revenue by diversifying its economy. Investing in African economies like agriculture, mining and technology provides new revenue sources and opportunities for Saudi Arabia. The third reason, access to Africa's abundant natural resources. Entering African economies means securing long-term access to their natural resources like critical minerals. Now, the fourth is Saudi Arabia's push to play peacemaker. Once a global pariah, Riyadh in recent years has been positioning itself as a peacemaker in West Asia and beyond. Given Africa's coups and conflicts, especially in the west of the continent and the Sahel, Riyadh could position itself to be the peacemaker by pushing to de-escalate conflicts and to foster regional stability. And fifth, regional rivalry. Saudi's economic push in Africa comes as its regional rival, the UAE, continues to pump money into the continent. The UAE has turned into a dominant player in the continent, with military aid, security cooperation, and heavy investments, including the building of ports. So Saudi Arabia is gearing up to not fall behind its rival. Now, as countries scramble for strategic influence in Africa, it remains to be seen who wins the race and who falls behind. And for our last story today, let's shift our attention to Mozambique. The country is facing an economic crisis, which has been fueled by political instability. And now the President, Daniel Chapo, has come up with a short-term solution. He has hinted at turning to China for debt restructuring. President Chapo said that he is open to asking China to restructure its $1.4 billion debt. Mozambique's government remains under great fiscal strain due to back-to-back economic contractions and widespread unrest. Now, this chaos and instability follow the country's disputed October elections that triggered violent protests. Over 300 people were killed and businesses and infrastructure were extensively damaged. The unrest has also deeply impacted public revenues. The country's economy remains fragile, and now pressure is mounting on the government to meet its external debt obligations. President Chapo has said that some bilateral lenders have already shown a willingness to support Mozambique, including through potential debt forgiveness. Speaking on the sidelines of an international development financing event in Spain, Chapo said that the government is seeking to engage with strategic development partners to restructure its debt. He added that such measures will ease the pressure on the government. On the question of making a debt restructuring request to China, President Chapo has said that rescheduling or even forgiveness of the debt of the country has, with its largest bilateral creditor, that is China, it is not an outlandish idea. Now, China holds around 14% of Mozambique's external public debt. However, no formal talks on debt restructuring have begun yet between the two countries. As of the end of 2024, Mozambique's total external public debt stood at approximately $9.8 billion. If Mozambique goes ahead with this plan, it will join a growing list of African nations who are being forced to restructure their debt amid soaring borrowing costs and strained public finances. These include Ghana, Zambia, and Ethiopia. The cash-strapped country has also approached the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, for a new funded program. Earlier this year, the country walked away from previous arrangement, citing misalignment with the new administration's policy direction. President Chapo has indicated that a new deal could be secured within months. Now, Mozambique is reeling under political and economic crisis. The economy is fragile and the pressure is mounting on the government to repay its loans. Now, it remains to be seen if the country's largest bilateral creditor, China, steps up to help Mozambique to get through the current crisis. And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.